Greetings! This is Liz Bowen with SuccessfullyU Real Estate Training and Mentoring Services, working in partnership with American Dream Real Estate School to present to you a coaching series. This is the coaching series on working with sellers and the home selling process. Let's take a high-level look at the home selling process, really from the perspective of our sellers. What our sellers see is us conducting an initial interview. And this is an opportunity where we're going to assess what the seller's needs are. We should be talking about goals and what we can do to make the home selling process as enjoyable and pain-free as possible. And after that initial interview, we may uncover some things that we need the seller to do to get the home ready to go on the market. And during that time, our sellers might be doing some cleaning, maybe getting trim painted, or perhaps making some needed repairs. Just some additional last-minute things, perhaps, to make sure that the home really shines when it goes on the market. What happens after that is that our sellers would sign a listing agreement, and that's our employment contract, right? That is the legal contract that allows us to go ahead and market the home, help the seller, represent the seller as either a transaction broker or an agent, and get the home sold on behalf of the seller and earn a commission. After we get the listing agreement signed, what normally happens next for our seller is that when a showing is scheduled, the seller would be notified. Now, you might choose to do that in a couple of different ways. It's possible that the front desk at your office will take calls and schedule showings for you, or you might need to employ a third-party company who would handle the showing process. But regardless, what will happen is that your seller will be notified whenever a showing is about to occur. And hopefully at that point, they're going to be preparing the home by staging it properly and making sure that it's ready for that particular showing. What you'll also be doing is advertising the property, employing all of the marketing techniques that you would in the event that you would be listing a home, and helping our sellers get their properties sold. So all of your advertising would start. You might also be talking to your seller about conducting open houses and whether, first of all, the seller wants you to do that. Second, when you might do that and how frequently. Now, at some point in the very near future, you're going to receive an offer on this property. So once you receive an offer, you'll be communicating that obviously to your sellers, and then working with your sellers to negotiate any counter offers that they might want to make back to a buyer. Once we get the negotiations settled, then your seller would be under contract. And at that point, I always tell them to start packing because now we're in earnest, right? We're working in good faith towards closing. Once we're under contract also, we want to talk to our sellers about the pros and cons of accepting backup offers, or also what would happen if the offer they received had a contingency built in. For example, the buyer is going to buy this property, but it's contingent on the sale of their property. Well, we need to know how to explain the pros and cons of both of those situations to our clients, to our sellers. Once we're under contract though, what would happen usually next is that we're going to order title work, and we're going to take a look at title work and make sure that the title for the property is clear of any blemishes and is easily transferable. If not, then we're going to work towards solving any title issues. And of course, we're going to be working with a title company to get that information. After title work gets reviewed, usually the next step is the inspection process. So our buyers are going to be working to get the inspection scheduled. As the listing agent, we're going to be working on getting the title work in and reviewing that with our clients. But once the buyer has conducted an inspection, then we should be anticipating receiving some kind of notification. Either that there are no items that need to be repaired, or that there are some items that the buyer was asking the seller to handle. So basically, we're going to go ahead and negotiate through any inspection items, and if necessary, have our sellers schedule some folks to come in to help with any repairs, or if not repairs, some maintenance issues. The next thing that we would want to talk to our sellers about is basically the process that's involved with the buyer getting their financing set and how that impacts the seller. So usually what happens after inspection is that the buyer's lender will order an appraisal. We'll want to talk to our sellers about what would happen in the event that the property does not appraise, and what their rights are, what their responsibilities are, and how we might negotiate through any appraisal issues. And then what usually happens is that the buyer will continue to work with financing, and at some point we're going to hopefully hear from the buyer's agent that the buyer has received what we would call clear to close or loan approval. Okay? What we're going to ask our sellers to next consider is making sure that the utilities have been transferred over into the buyer's name, or at least that the seller has set a time or a date at which point the utility should no longer be in his or her name. And then we can expect that the buyer will ask for a time to come back into the home and do a final walkthrough. That usually happens very close to closing, but we also want to explain to our sellers that the buyer contractually has a right to come back through the home before closing and just verify that it's in the same condition that it was at the time that the contract was written. Then we're going to usually have closing as our next milestone. It's a major milestone, but we would here, usually in Colorado, we're working with a title company and we're closing at a title company. And at that point, we've got possession transferred, we have cash exchange, money exchanged for keys, and possession is granted to the buyer. And that's really the home selling process, soup to nuts, right, at a high level, and what we'd want to explain to our seller and setting proper expectations about what he or she can expect. Another way of looking at the home selling process is to really use your contract to buy and sell dates and deadlines table as a means of explaining the process to your clients. Now, it's not in chronological order, but it does give you a really great tool that you can use to kind of explain what's going to happen and when, particularly based on the dates that have been negotiated on the contract to buy and sell and any counter proposals. So I encourage you to use this as a tool to basically go through and explain to the seller, these are the steps that are involved in this process, and this is what you can expect will be coming up next for us. So let's take a step back and talk a little bit real quick about how I'm going to get the property ready to go and how I'm going to get it set up so it's ready for showings based on the process that we discussed. So we've got a new listing. What are some of the basic things that we're going to do to make sure that buyers can get into the property, that they know it's for sale, some basic marketing ideas? Well, we would start off with a yard sign, right? So we'd have a sign in the yard. We'd want to put a lockbox on the door to make sure that buyers' agents can get into the property in a way that is controlled, so we know exactly who's accessed the property in case any problems were to come up. We might have brochure boxes that we have attached to the yard signs or located somewhere else that allow us to communicate through flyers, some really important information for people who are maybe just driving by the property, right? So we'd want to have some brochure boxes and some flyers to go in those brochure boxes. You might also want to encourage having a virtual tour company come in and do some taping of the property, or having a professional photographer. Now, these are obviously optional, and there's a cost associated. I'll tell you that in most cases, when we talk about the difference between working with buyers and working with sellers, buyers take up your time, sellers take up your money, right? Because you are responsible for marketing that property. And so the sellers want to see that you have some skin in the game, right? That you're working hard and you're spending some money to make sure that the property is visible and presented well and marketed. So that being said, based on the price range of the property, virtual tours and professional photography may be something that is just part of your marketing plan. Now, that's going to be a call that you make, but just as an example, if you're listing a home or a townhouse or a condo and it's a $145,000 property, you might decide that you're qualified enough to go ahead and take photos of the property and that those would present the property in the best possible way. But if you're working with a $300,000 home, then it probably would be a better decision to go ahead and have a professional come out and consider having virtual tours and professional photography. So obviously these are just additional things that you may consider as part of your marketing plan, but how you're going to present this property in the best light possible, doing the best job for your seller. That's what we're really concerned with. So the last thing on this slide would be showing management. And I kind of briefly talked about that. You might decide that you need to have a third-party company manage the scheduling of showings and the notifications of your seller. Also, part of this process, really important, your seller's going to want to know what kind of feedback other agents have or other buyers have concerning their property. Are they interested in the home after seeing it? Should anything be done? Can they do anything better? What were some of the pros and cons? So showing management not only includes potentially working with a third-party company, or perhaps it's just your front desk who's going to be manning those calls, but also communicating the outcomes of those showings back to your sellers. Other things to keep in mind when we're talking about how we're going to be marketing a property, I want to bring up this one point. It's called the coming soon listing, and we recently had some information given to us by the state of Colorado and how they want us to manage coming soon marketing. So what's really important here, some agents are using coming soon, maybe putting a coming soon rider on a yard sign on a property that's not currently in a multiple listing service, as a way to encourage some excitement, to get people to call, people driving by, maybe they're doing some networking marketing, but they haven't put the property in the multiple listing system or the MLS yet. And what the Division of Real Estate is concerned about is whether we're doing that in the best interest of our client, or could someone say that what we're actually trying to do is to fish for buyers by putting a coming soon sign on a property that's not in the MLS, and in the hopes really of maybe making more money. So for example, if I've got a coming soon rider on a property and I've got a yard sign and it's not in the MLS yet, then all of the other agents that are part of that board don't have information about the property. They don't have access to it, just me. And what I might be doing if I wasn't reputable is I might be hoping that I'm going to get a buyer who drives by, who calls on the sign even though it's coming soon, and I have an opportunity to kind of slide them in before anybody else and perhaps double in the deal because I now have found a buyer who's interested in this property. So I think what's really important is that the Division of Real Estate doesn't say that you can't do a coming soon type of marketing for the property, but what they do say is you have to be able to prove that this is in the best interest of your client, first of all, and second, that your client actually wants you to do this. It should not be a unilateral decision that you're making, nor should it be kind of standard policy on how you manage your listings, okay? So just some important things to keep in mind. Additionally, again, we just want to make sure that the problem is that if a broker is limiting exposure to get buyer clients or double in the deal, that's not working in the best interest of your seller. And that's what the Division of Real Estate has a problem with. Okay? You should be, this also should be the seller's decision, not your own. And it should be in writing prior to marketing, so we would want to make sure that we've got that in the listing agreement. When we're advertising the listing, what's really important to keep in mind is that we want to talk about the house, not who should live in it. And of course, we want to avoid any fair housing concerns. And we're talking about making sure that we're not discriminating in any of our advertising. So we want to make sure that we are not doing anything that would be considered discriminatory against the protected classes. And of course, this is federal regulation that you're very familiar with. But keep in mind, we just want to stick to some general terms to describe surrounding neighborhoods. Nothing, again, that might take us to a point where folks would consider that we are discriminating in our advertising. Another really important idea that you might want to consider is whether or not to have the home professionally staged. There are some wonderful people out there, very talented, who can come into a listing or come into a property and work with the seller, basically as a third party, to give them some suggestions and ideas on how to take what's already in the home and maybe transform it so the home shows better. In some situations, it might even be a great idea for a professional stager to come and bring things into the home so that it really shines and help the seller see the benefit in making sure that the property is basically presented in the best way possible. And I'll be quite honest with you, working with a professional stager does a lot of great things. It really does. First and foremost is that if there is a problem with this property and you're having trouble communicating that there's an issue with where the furniture is located, we want to downplay a flaw, we want to bring up or play up a really positive aspect, and the seller and you just are not getting across, this information isn't going across as well. Having a third party come in and give their opinion can be worth its weight in gold, right? So the seller might have trouble accepting this information from you. But when a third-party person who does this for a living comes in and says, no, we really do need to move this piece of furniture over here because we're going to have some issues with buyers seeing this particular aspect, then the likelihood is that the seller may take that advice more to heart than perhaps your advice. And that's just the way it goes, right? But having a professional stager as a partner can really add some value to getting your home sold and getting them sold for a higher dollar amount and faster, which really statistics show that having a home professionally staged will accomplish. What I have here for you is just a quick example of the benefit of having a home professionally staged. Having someone come in and just take the existing furniture and rearranging it can create a completely different feeling in a room because that's what professional stagers do. That's what they know how to do, is to create that look and that feeling that will help a buyer really see themselves in a home and to play up those positive features. So just a little example of how having a stager come in can really be a benefit to a particular property. At this point, what I'd like you to do is to go ahead and grab the worksheet that we have associated with this particular video. So it's your listing appointment worksheet. And I want you to take a couple of minutes and go over question number 1. The question number 1 on the worksheet says, in what situation might you recommend a home staging company to a seller? I'm going to go ahead and give you 2 minutes to jot down some ideas. Let's take a second and talk about open houses. There's a lot of discussion out there about whether open houses truly are in the benefit of the seller, or do they really just help out the broker? And I'll tell you my opinion. My opinion is that open houses can do great things for your sellers if you're putting in enough effort and you're really making your open house an event. Okay, so here are some suggestions that I have for you in terms of how to really make an open house a great experience, not only for your sellers, but also for you. So to start off with, do they work? Of course they do. They increase exposure for the property. If anything, nosy neighbors can often be the folks that might have friends or family that they would love to have live close by to them. So we want to encourage those nosy neighbors to come and check out the open house. Now, also, it might be an opportunity for you to talk to some folks who are also thinking about moving, and now they're seeing you kind of as a neighborhood expert. So that works to your benefit. In addition, there is an opportunity there for you to potentially pick up new buyers for those folks that come through the open house but find that this particular listing or this particular property just doesn't fit their needs. Now, before the open house, I would encourage you to consider sending postcards out to the neighbors, or perhaps putting flyers together and walking the neighborhood, personally inviting the neighbors to come over to your open house. Another idea, go ahead and email your current client base, all of the folks that are in your contact management network, folks that you have in your database. Let them know you're going to be working an open house, where that property is located, and some of the great things about the home, and encourage them to come by and say hi to you. Also, Facebook, Twitter, use your social media outlets as a way to, again, let people know that you're holding the house open. In addition, Realtor.com and PPAR are great avenues for you to set flags that indicate the property is going to be held open. A lot of folks are online and they're looking for properties that they're going to want to check out over the weekend as they're driving through neighborhoods. So those are great tools for you to use to make sure that people know that you're holding a house open in advance. Lastly, the National Association of Realtors, NAR, they do an open house weekend once a month, and it's a great opportunity for you to make sure that you're holding your properties open on that weekend, because there's a lot of national marketing that goes into that, and you can kind of ride on the coattails of some of the additional marketing that's going on for your open house. Lastly, if you don't want to hold a house open, you might be very busy working with several buyers at the same time, but you still want to be supporting your sellers and doing everything you can to help get their home sold. Just consider that there may be other people at your office who would love to sit this house open. So make sure that you reach out to your coworkers or reach out to other realtors that you know and trust and see if perhaps they'd like to hold the home open if you're not in a position to be able to do so. In addition, here are some things that you might need when you're going to be holding a house open. First of all, I'm going to recommend that you have a lot of directional signs. I mean a lot of directional signs. And the best way to do this is to actually have the signs that have your name on them versus some generic, maybe corrugated kinds of open house signs. The beauty here is that if you have open house signs that have your name on them, then if you're placing them, and a lot of them, around the neighborhood to guide people into this open house, other people who live in the neighborhood are then seeing your name, your signs, and they're basically associating you with their neighborhood. And that's a great thing for you, because what we want to do is to subconsciously kind of plant that seed that anybody who wants to sell their home in this neighborhood should be talking to you. So I would encourage you to invest in some open house signs that are actually personalized or customized and have your name on them. In addition, you should have a sign-in sheet, and when people come into the open house, you're going to encourage them to go ahead and sign in. Little trick, I usually always fill in the first one because a lot of people are hesitant to be the first person to fill out a sheet, right? So I'll fill in the first block with maybe a friend's name or a family member's name, so I know who that person is. And then more people are more likely to subsequently go ahead and fill out your sheet for you. Just a little tip. Also, you'll want to have some information or brochures about the property that you can hand out to people as they come in through the front door. You can remove the flyers from the brochure box and use those as a product to hand out to people. I find that that's really probably a good idea regardless. If you're holding a house open and there are brochures in the brochure box, then people may just stop, pick a brochure, and I'd rather that they come into the house because they have this opportunity to do so and see how beautiful it really is for themselves. Some other ideas that I have for you. First of all, consider baking cookies in the house for your open house. Now this does a lot of great things. First of all, you'll want to obviously get permission from your sellers, make sure they're okay with you baking in the house. I like to bring my own cookie sheet, bring my own spatula, and I'll go to the grocery store and I'll get the pre-popped or pre-made, pre-formed cookie dough that you could just kind of break apart. What it does though, when people walk in the front door and they smell freshly baked cookies, is it creates this beautiful nostalgic kind of experience for them, and it makes the home, makes their house smell like and feel like home. So it really goes a long way in making sure that people feel a connection to the property. Also, if you don't want to go ahead and bake cookies, you can get candles. I would strongly recommend that you go with some kind of vanilla, some kind of chocolate, just some kind of foodie smell for your candles. It does the same thing. Another great idea, I think I mentioned this before, but go ahead and knock on the neighbors' doors and let them know that you're holding the house open. Invite them personally to come on over and check it out. So you've shown the property, you've had an open house, and an offer comes in. At this point, what I want you to consider is, how can I get the most money for my seller, and how can I get the best desirable terms from my seller? Well, I've got this offer. Now might be a great time for me to go above and beyond and to do some additional things, some additional legwork to encourage as many offers as possible, not just the one in front of me. So I'm going to recommend a couple of things. First of all, encourage competing offers by going back and calling anyone else who had shown the property, who had some positive things to say, and letting them know, hey, we've got an offer in on 123 Main Street, and I know that you had shown this property last week and your buyer was somewhat interested. If they're really interested, we would love to get an offer from them as well. Do you think you might have something for us? I just wanted to let you know that we got an offer in, and to give your buyer an opportunity to go ahead and to present an offer as well. Okay, so really good technique. We want to, again, encourage as many offers as possible because that will work in the best interest of our sellers. Additionally, if you met any unrepresented buyers at an open house who had expressed interest in the property, give them a call as well. Let them know that an offer's come in and find out if they were truly interested in perhaps making an offer themselves. Lastly, what I want you to consider is that the more offers we get, the more choices your seller has. So I just want you to consider the fact that we want to encourage as many offers as possible when we get one in. From that, there's usually a question about whether you can share information about an offer with other people. Other people, of course, being other agents. Now, what's really great here is that there's some guidance for us in our listing contracts. We should have talked to the seller about this when we had the listing agreement signed. So let's just kind of refresh our memory on that. Section 5.8 in our listing agreement basically says, well, when asked, the broker either will or will not disclose to prospective buyers and cooperating brokers the existence of offers on the property and whether the offers were obtained by the broker, by a broker within the brokerage firm, or by somebody else. Okay, so we're basically asking for some permission here from the seller about whether you can communicate some information about an offer to other brokers who might be asking. Now, I would tell you that it's in your best interest, your seller's best interest, excuse me, right, for us to get as many offers in as possible. And we want those offers to be good offers. We want them to be strong. We want to get as much as we can for our seller and the terms that our seller's looking for. So if someone were to call me, or if I was reaching out to another broker who showed the property last week, letting that broker know that I have an offer on the table, and we'd love to encourage your buyer to also create an offer and present that if they're interested in this property. And that broker asks me, well, what can you tell me about the offer? I want you to know that based on how this was checked and the information that you get when discussing this topic with your client, the answer is yeah, you can share information about this offer because you want to encourage the best offer possible for your seller. So can you talk about how much the offer was that you received? If your seller says you can disclose it, then you can disclose it. Now, you might want to get an email from your seller so that you have something you can always go back to that clearly indicates your seller is giving you permission to talk about these things with another broker. But as long as your seller has given you that permission, you absolutely can share information about this offer with other brokers. For example, you might get a lowball offer in. Well, we want to obviously encourage as many great offers as possible. If you don't feel comfortable about providing specific, explicit detail, you could certainly say, my seller is, I'll tell you, we're not thrilled with the offer that we have. We would love to get an offer from you guys. I'd encourage you to present an offer, and I'll be happy to get that to my seller. Now, apart from that, if you wanted to say anything like we're definitely looking for, our list price, which is what we marketed, or we can basically make the information we provide as general or as specific as our sellers give us permission to do. Always working to help our sellers get the best deal possible. So that being said, go ahead and grab your worksheet. I have another question for you. So question number 2 says, how would you explain the backup offer and contingency offer process to your seller? Now, I'm going to give you about 4 minutes to work on this, and I'd like you to jot down some ideas on how you would describe the process and how you would explain pros and cons of both of those to your seller. let's talk about one of the next milestones that's going to happen, and that's the inspection process. Now, I've put up here on the slide a reminder of what the different dates and deadlines are that are associated with this process, because there are several. First of all, we want to talk about the inspection objection deadline versus the inspection resolution deadline. Keep in mind that the inspection objection deadline is basically a buyer's deadline. So the buyer has by the inspection objection deadline to get to us any kind of notification of anything that either they want fixed with the property or that they have found the property to be unsatisfactory and they would like to terminate the contract. Now, once we get that notification, we have, working with our sellers, up until the inspection resolution deadline to resolve any items and to make sure that we get signatures from both parties on that resolution document. So keep in mind that your contract should give you several days gap between your inspection objection and your resolution, not just 24 hours. For example, if your buyer wants 17 items to be fixed, well, you talk to your seller, you explain the pros and cons, the seller says, we will do 10 of those items. We get that back on the resolution deadline. Well, if we don't get a buyer signature on that resolution document by the end of the day, then we're basically out of contract within 24 hours. So we want to keep in mind that we want to give enough time to actually negotiate through to a resolution that can be signed by both parties, and 24 hours really is not enough time. Okay, so just keep in mind that we want to make sure that we've got enough time here to get all of the resolution negotiated through and get signatures on that resolution document. But also, as you know, sellers do not have to agree to do all of the items that are requested on an inspection objection notice, right? This is a negotiation process, and it is not contractually obligated at this time. If it wasn't on the original contract to buy and sell, then our sellers don't have to do it, right? They can easily say, I refuse to do any of the items, but keep in mind that the buyer also has an opportunity to get out of the contract if we can't get to a resolution. So what's truly in your seller's best interest? All right, what might happen at this point, once we have a signed resolution, is that your seller should be working with third-party companies to schedule repairs or to have some regular maintenance done as was negotiated and agreed to by both parties off of that resolution document. Alrighty, a quick question for you on that worksheet. This is question number 3 I'd like you to look at. How would you explain the inspection process and each party's rights to your seller? I'm going to give you 4 minutes to write down some notes on how you might explain that to your clients. one of the next major milestones that we want to talk about is the appraisal process, as well as loan approval, right? And these really are kind of instigated by the buyer, but there's definite repercussions for our seller, and we want to be able to explain to our seller what happens if the property doesn't appraise, and what happens if the buyer cannot get loan approval, or basically cannot get a loan that is satisfactory to the buyer. Now, I've put up here just a sneak peek at the contract to buy and sell so we can take a look at the dates and deadlines table. So what we're talking about here in terms of the loan, we've got loan application and loan objection deadlines. And then for the appraisal, we have appraisal deadline and appraisal objection deadline. Now, these last two appraisal dates are only going to be in effect if we have a buyer who's working with a conventional loan. As you know, FHA and VA loans do not have this appraisal deadline to be considered because the buyer actually has until closing to get the loan appraisals taken care of, or to object if the property does not appraise. But I do want you to consider how you're going to counsel your seller and make sure they understand what should happen in the event that the property doesn't appraise. There's a lot of concern about whether we just have to lower the price, but in some situations, you might be fighting for your seller and encouraging the buyer to have another appraisal done. You might actually want to talk to your seller about paying for another appraisal if you feel that that first appraisal that didn't come in at price is inaccurate. Okay, so there are options here. This is just another opportunity for us to negotiate through. Secondly, we want to talk about how the buyer's loan approval deadline impacts the seller, and what it means that we get a clear to close from the buyer's loan officer. Okay, important pieces of the puzzle. All right, again, I have a nice quick question for you off your worksheet. So if you take a look at question number 4, it says, how would you explain the appraisal process to your seller? I'd like you to go ahead and spend about 3 minutes jotting down some ideas. Let's take a second and talk about walkthrough and closing. What I find to be really interesting is that the walkthrough, when it's mentioned in the contract, is very brief. The language is very brief and really doesn't talk about who has what rights in the event that the buyer's walkthrough brings to light the fact that the property does not meet the physical condition, the physical condition of the property does not comply with the contract. What happens? Who has what rights? What do we do next, right? None of that is discussed in the contract to buy and sell. So what usually happens is that walkthrough can kind of be a landmine. And we really want to make sure that we're meeting all proper expectations and that as the listing broker, we have talked to the seller and we've worked to verify that everything is as it should be, that the seller is out, that the buyer can see the property clearly, and that we wouldn't have a problem, right? We've done everything we can proactively to make sure that the property complies with the contract and that the walkthrough goes smoothly. The second thing I want to talk to you about is closing, right? Hey, this is the good news. This is the great time. This is when we're going to the title company and we are closing the property. So this is where we're going to recommend to our seller that they make sure they bring a picture ID with them to closing. Also that they bring all of the keys in their possession, any remote controls for the garage door openers, they bring that to closing, and hopefully they've already made arrangements. So services like trash, utilities, those kinds of things have been canceled or taken out of their name and just waiting for the buyer to call and put into the buyer's name. Also, keep in mind that we just want to coach our sellers through the process. If the seller does have to bring money to closing, that we've already talked to the seller about what that dollar amount is, and we've let the seller know that the funds have to either be wire transferred or they have to be brought as good funds, maybe a cashier's check or a money order, usually a cashier's check, but a personal check won't work. So we just need to make sure we're talking to the sellers and getting them ready so that the closing can go smoothly. All right. I hope you've enjoyed this session. We've talked about the home selling process. We talked about a lot of really great information. And if you haven't had a chance to complete the worksheet that accompanies this video, please do take the time to go back through it and add any final thoughts that you might have. Really get an idea of how you would explain some of these important milestones to your client. And then, of course, if you have any questions or you'd like to do some one-on-one coaching or some group coaching around this topic, feel free to give us a call at SuccessfullyU.